Just moments ago, Buckingham Palace broke its silence with a revelation that sent shockwaves around the globe. The room stood still as King Charles and Prince William stepped forward, united, emotional, and visibly shaken. This wasn't a public update. It was a devastating confession. The world had feared the worst. Now, the worst was here, and the truth is far heavier than anyone imagined. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The atmosphere was unlike anything ever witnessed at a royal press briefing. The weight of generations hung in the air. And yet, no pageantry, no elaborate introductions, just silence, heavy with meaning. The statement delivered was simple, but its implications were profound. Princess Catherine's medical condition had taken a tragic and deeply troubling turn. For weeks, speculation had been building, whispers of complications, of unseen battles behind the palace walls. But no one expected this. Standing together, shoulder to shoulder, King Charles and Prince William presented a front of unity, but beneath it was the visible strain of two men unraveling under grief, duty, and helplessness. Charles spoke first, his voice unusually raw. "She is the heart of this family," he said, "not with ceremony but with sorrow." In that moment, he wasn't the monarch. He was a father-in-law, mourning the pain of someone he considered a daughter. His face, often composed and unreadable, betrayed a sadness too heavy to hide. Then came William, his eyes lowered, his expression tense. He offered gratitude to the public for their unwavering support, but he didn't promise recovery. He didn't say things were improving. Instead, his words trembled under the pressure of uncertainty. "We are hopeful," he said softly, "but we must also prepare." Within moments, the world reacted. From Windsor Castle to the gates of Kensington Palace, candlelight vigils ignited like wildfire. Social media collapsed under the weight of millions demanding answers. Flowers, cards, and prayers poured in from every corner of the globe. News anchors interrupted regular broadcasts. Royal commentators were left speechless. And in households far beyond the palace walls, families cried for a woman they had never met but deeply admired. It wasn't just the gravity of the news that stunned the public, it was how the palace delivered it. No carefully filtered optimism, no sugar-coated reassurances, only truth, vulnerable, painful, unapologetic. It was a moment of shared humanity, and in that shared moment, Catherine was no longer just a future queen. She became a symbol of fragility and strength. But even as the statement ended, the questions had only begun. There were no medical details, no explanations, no timelines. Just a plea, a deeply human plea for privacy, for dignity, for hope in a time of uncertainty. And behind that plea, a silence that once again began to settle over the royal family. But what could have led to such a heartbreaking moment? To understand, we must rewind to where the silence first began, and where the walls of secrecy began to rise. When Princess Catherine first vanished from public life, it was brushed off as routine recovery. But weeks passed. Then months. No photographs, no events, not even staged appearances. It wasn't the absence that alarmed people, it was the silence. And behind that silence, the palace was hiding something far more dangerous than anyone knew. At first, the royal communication machine spun its familiar web. Kensington Palace announced that Catherine had undergone a planned abdominal surgery. The message was polished, controlled, and deliberately calm. They assured the public there was no cause for concern. The timeline for recovery? A few weeks at most. But seasoned royal watchers knew better. This wasn't the first time the palace had sugar-coated reality to protect an image. Still, most accepted the official line, until the silence lingered longer than expected. The usual rhythm of royal life began to falter. William, normally a pillar of royal appearances, started withdrawing. Charity events, gala dinners, public engagements, one by one. They fell off his calendar. Some cancellations were explained vaguely. Others came with no explanation at all. And when he did show up, there was something different in his demeanor. His smiles didn't reach his eyes. He looked like a man barely holding something together. Meanwhile, the world began to notice the absence of the most photographed woman in the monarchy. No hospital discharge photos. No paparazzi shots of her being driven home. Not a single glimpse. Catherine had disappeared. Not just from royal life, but from existence itself. Paparazzi stationed outside royal grounds failed to catch even a blurred shadow. Journalists began whispering in newsrooms. Why hadn't even William been seen visiting the hospital? Was something wrong? Or worse, was something being covered up? The palace stayed quiet. Their statements, when they came, were short and deliberately vague. The princess continues to recover in private, they repeated. But the public was no longer satisfied with hollow reassurance. The carefully orchestrated silence began to backfire, and slowly, the narrative began slipping from the palace's grip. Whispers turned into questions. and questions turned into quiet panic behind palace walls. One royal aide, overheard at a high-profile event, muttered what no one had yet dared say publicly. There have been complications. That single word spread like wildfire among insiders. Another, more chilling report came from a hospital worker who allegedly contacted a foreign journalist. Their message was short and haunting. It's worse than they say. The press didn't publish the source, but they didn't ignore it either. That line became the spark that ignited a firestorm. Now, every missed appearance, every silent day, became part of a growing theory. This wasn't a peaceful recovery. It was a crisis, one that was being concealed with alarming precision. The palace gates, once symbols of grandeur, now looked like walls hiding a truth too terrifying to confront. And yet, the world kept asking, pushing, pleading for answers. And as the world tried to decode the silence, one man inside the palace was losing control, and he was about to break every royal protocol to protect the woman he loved. He was trained for composure, groomed for duty, but nothing could prepare Prince William for the emotional collapse that would follow. The husband in him rose above the prince, and he made a decision that shook the monarchy to its core. In the early days, William tried to follow the royal script. He smiled when expected. He nodded in meetings. He issued short, rehearsed statements meant to soothe the nation. But behind closed doors at Adelaide Cottage, his world was unraveling. The woman he loved, the woman who had stood beside him through every chapter of their royal journey, was slipping away. And the palace insisted he pretend otherwise. It was a script he could no longer recite. Isolation crept in like fog. Friends noticed his absence from social circles. Advisors whispered about his unreturned calls. He withdrew from even his closest aides, choosing silence over spin. And when he did speak, his words came sharp and defiant. Behind palace walls, tensions soared. Senior aides urged him to cooperate, to keep up appearances, to protect the institution. But William wasn't protecting the institution anymore. He was fighting for Catherine. The breaking point came quietly, in the form of an email, 5 words typed in the subject line, sent directly to his father. She deserves more than silence. What followed wasn't just a plea, it was a declaration of war against the cold machinery of monarchy. And when that email was leaked to a journalist close to the cruist, family, everything exploded. The headlines were brutal, the pressure unbearable, but William didn't walk it back. He stood by every word. Public outcry intensified. The people weren't angry with William, they were angry with the institution that had kept them in the dark. And yet, the palace continued pushing a safer narrative. Advisors proposed a controlled photo release, perhaps Catherine in a garden, smiling faintly. But William refused. We're not staging grief. He snapped in one explosive meeting. We're not selling dignity. Instead, William did the unthinkable. Επικοινώνησε με μια χούφτα βετεράνους δημοσιογράφους, όχι για να κάνει κάποια δήλωση, αλλά για να τους υπονοήσει, να τους οθήσει, να τους καθοδηγήσει προς την αλήθεια που το Παλάτι αρνούνταν να αναγνωρίσει. Σιγά σιγά, προσεκτικά, έμπιστες φωνές άρχισαν να αλλάζουν τόνο. Σταμάτησαν να παπαγαλίζουν τις επίσημες ατάκες. Άρχισαν να αμφισβητούν τα χρονοδιαγράμματα, τη μυστικότητα και την ηθική της σιωπής. Εν τω μεταξύ, η κατάσταση της Κάθριν επιδεινωνόταν. Ο Γουίλιαμ παρακολουθούσε. Η εξασθένησή της. Η φωνή της, κάποτε ζωντανή, αχνή έγινε. Η ενέργειά της εξαφανίστηκε. Το φως στα μάτια της χαμήλωσε και εκείνος δεν μπορούσε να κάνει τίποτα. Το Παλάτι εξακολουθούσε να επιμένει στον έλεγχο του μηνύματος, εξακολουθούσε να πιστεύει ότι μπορούσε να διαχειριστεί την αντίληψη. Αλλά ο Γουίλιαμ είχε ξεπεράσει το σημείο του πρωτοκόλλου. Δεν ήθελε μια καλά διαχειριζόμενη τραγωδία. Ήθελε να φανεί η γυναίκα του. Να ακουστεί, να τιμηθεί, όχι να κρυφτεί. Κάθε μέρα που περνούσε, ο Γουίλιαμ βυθιζόταν όλο και περισσότερο σε συναισθηματική κατάρρευση. Όσοι τον περιέβαλαν είδαν την αλλαγή. Τα δημόσια χαμόγελά του εξαφανίστηκαν εντελώς. Η ψυχραιμία του, που κάποτε είχε συγκρατηθεί προσεκτικά, άρχισε να παρουσιάζει ρογμές. Τα μάτια του, που κάποτε ήταν ήρεμα, τώρα γέμιζαν από ορατή εξάντληση. Για πρώτη φορά, ο πρίγκιπας Γουίλιαμ, κληρονόμος του θρόνου, δεν κουβαλούσε το στέμμα, κουβαλούσε πόνο. Και ενώ τα συναισθήματα του Γουίλιαμ έβραζαν κρυφά, μια άλλη βασιλική προσωπικότητα, η πιο απροσδόκητη, ήταν έτοιμη να πάρει θέση που θα άλλαζε τα πάντα. Για δεκαετίες, ο βασιλιάς Κάρολος ήταν ο μάστορας της αυτοσυγκράτησης. Αλλά τη στιγμή που στάθηκε δίπλα στο κρεβάτι του νοσοκομείου της Εκατερίνης, κάτι μέσα του θρηματίστηκε. Αυτό που είδε τον ανάγκασε να σπάσει τη βασιλική παράδοση και να εκδώσει μια εντολή που συγκλώνησε το παλάτι από τα θεμέλια του. Υποτίθεται ότι θα ήταν μια ήσυχη επίσκεψη. Μία από τις πολλές χειρονομίες που έκανε ο Κάρολος στο παρασκήνιο, μακριά από τις κάμερες που φλας και τις αυστηρά προγραμματισμένες εμφανίσεις. Αλλά αυτήν τη φορά ήταν διαφορετικά. Δεν περίμενε αυτό που είδε. Το χλωμό πρόσωπο, την αδύναμη φωνή. Ο ανίποτος φόβος που γέμιζε το αποστηρωμένο δωμάτιο. Η Κατρίν δεν χρειαζόταν να μιλήσει. Η κατάστασή της έλεγε την ιστορία. Καμία λέξη δεν μπορούσε. Και για πρώτη φορά, σε μια μακρά βασιλική ζωή που χαρακτηριζόταν από ευπρέπεια, ο Κάρολος δεν μπορούσε να κρυφτεί πίσω από τίτλους ή παραδόσεις. Έφυγε από το δωμάτιο εμφανώς ταραγμένος, η σιωπή του πιο βαριά από οτιδήποτε είχε κουβαλήσει ποτέ. Εκείνο το βράδυ, στο Clarence House, συνέβη κάτι πρωτοφανές. Συγκλήθηκε μια συνάντηση όχι για να συζητηθούν διπλωματικές περιοδίες ή τελετουργικά καθήκοντα, αλλά για να αντιμετωπιστεί η καταρρέουσα ψευδαίσθηση που το Παλάτι είχε ακούραστα προσπαθήσει να διατηρήσει. Το δωμάτιο ήταν γεμάτο με κορυφαίους βοηθούς, συμβούλους και την καμήλα στο πλευρό του. Αυτό που ακολούθησε άφησε άναυδους τους πάντες. Ο Κάρολος, συνήθως ήρεμος και συνειδητός, χτύπησε την γροθιά του στο τραπέζι. Το δωμάτιο πάγωσε και τότε είπε τα λόγια που κανείς δεν περίμενε από έναν μονάρχη. Τέλος στο κρύψιμο. Ας μάθει ο κόσμος με τι αγωνίζεται. Η Καμίλα, πάντα η στρατηγική, προσπάθησε να τον λογικεύσει. Τον προέτρεψε να είναι προσεκτικός, υπενθυμίζοντας του την τάση του κοινού να αντιδρά υπερβολικά. Για την ευθύνη της μοναρχίας να φαίνεται ισχυρή. Αλλά ο Κάρολος δεν ενδιαφερόταν πια να φαίνεται. Είχε σταματήσει να προσποιείται. His voice cut through the room. Firm, final. This isn't about optics anymore. It's about her. That sentence ended the debate. For the first time in his reign, Charles asserted not just his authority but his heart. Senior advisors exchanged glances. This wasn't the Charles they knew. This was something else. Something unrestrained. Something human. The kind of raw leadership that couldn't be filtered through media strategy or institutional fear. And in that moment, lines were drawn. Some supported the decision. Others feared it would unleash chaos. But no one questioned the gravity of what had just occurred. The palace had changed forever. And in the days that followed, something even more unexpected happened. William, who had been at odds with his father for weeks, began to see him differently. They had both been broken by the same truth. And for the first time in years, they weren't just father and son. They were allies. Together, they began crafting the announcement, not as royal figures spinning a press release, but as men grieving beside a woman they both loved dearly. Meetings turned from tense to focused. Lines were rewritten, words chosen carefully, not for diplomacy, but for impact. They rehearsed the speech behind closed doors, not because they wanted perfection, but because they knew that one misstep could cause panic, confusion, or worse. Catherine's story would no longer be told in whispers or half-truths. It would be spoken plainly, courageously, and with the weight it deserved. But the decision didn't come without consequence. Inside the palace, a storm was brewing. Advisors who once held unquestioned power began pushing back. They feared the precedent. They feared the backlash. But most of all, they feared the truth. And now, that truth was no longer a secret. It was a reckoning. But even with the truth ready to be shared, what the public didn't yet know was the chilling timeline of Catherine's deterioration. A timeline kept hidden for far too long. Long before the world began asking questions, the palace already had answers. Catherine's condition wasn't new. In fact, it had been quietly unfolding in shadow, overlooked, underestimated, and buried by royal strategy. It began with a routine blood test in the final weeks of 2023. Just another screening. Something Catherine had done 100 times before. But this time, something wasn't right. Irregularities appeared, small markers, easily dismissed by anyone unwilling to see the bigger picture. Palace doctors flagged them, quietly recommending further tests. But the response from senior aides was cautious, even dismissive. Let's not cause unnecessary alarm, one reportedly advised. The priority, they insisted, was stability, calm, control. Catherine, meanwhile, was already feeling it. The fatigue wasn't just physical, it ran deeper. Her energy dipped, her appetite thinned. She was losing weight, but still smiled in public. She attended meetings, hosted events, filmed outreach videos. Behind her polished grace, she was falling apart. And yet, she refused to stop. In her mind, stepping back meant surrender, and surrender was never part of her vocabulary. Twice, she collapsed. The first came at a private fundraising dinner. It was quiet, hidden. Aides quickly blamed a migraine, ushering guests away, before anyone could suspect the truth. The second happened at a children's hospital, one of her most beloved causes. This time, she nearly fainted behind the scenes. Security handled it. Staff kept it silent. The narrative remained intact. Doctors were alarmed. They pushed for answers, more tests, deeper scans. And finally, clarity came. A diagnosis that should have stopped everything in its tracks. But it didn't. Not immediately. The decision was made at the highest level to keep it quiet. Let's wait until after the holidays. One advisor urged, let her rest. Let the public believe she's recovering. What they didn't account for was the pace of the illness. It didn't wait. It didn't pause for optics or tradition. It advanced, quietly, aggressively. While the monarchy debated headlines, Catherine's body was waging war. William knew something was wrong. He had begged her to slow down. pleaded with aides to reconsider the silence. But by then, it was too late. The image of the perfect royal couple was already being curated. The photographs, the video messages, each moment carefully timed to uphold calm. But behind the scenes, cracks widened, conversations turned tense. Ethics were debated in hushed voices. Some believed the public had a right to know. Others feared that the truth would plunge the monarchy into crisis. Two major figures, Charles and Catherine, both facing health battles. The monarchy wouldn't survive the storm, so they buried it, not out of cruelty, but fear. The kind of fear that makes even the strongest institutions turn cowardly. They told themselves it was temporary, that treatment could be private, that they'd reveal everything when the time was right. But cancer doesn't care about timing, and Catherine's condition was already slipping past the point of containment. Within palace walls, lines were being drawn, trust began to fracture. Advisors who once stood united now whispered behind doors, asking themselves the question no one dared say out loud. Had the palace sacrificed a woman's truth to protect the crown's illusion? And while the institution fought to protect its image, the one person at the center of it all chose to do what no royal had ever done before: speak for herself. No palace press release, no aides, no PR, just Catherine alone in a quiet garden delivering a truth so devastating it stopped the world in its tracks. For 94 seconds, royalty became raw humanity. And in that short time, everything changed. The video appeared without warning. It wasn't part of a larger announcement. It wasn't accompanied by royal music or official emblems. It was just her. Her voice was steady. But the weight of what she said hung heavy in every word. She confirmed the rumors the palace had evaded for weeks. Yes, she had undergone major surgery. Yes, it revealed cancer. And yes, she was now undergoing preventive chemotherapy. She didn't speak in technical jargon or polished phrases. She spoke plainly, humanly. Her eyes, her pauses, her tone, all carried an undercurrent of finality. She thanked the public for their patience. She asked for privacy. And yet, hidden between each sentence was something deeper. It didn't feel like an update. It felt like a farewell. Not dramatic, not loud, just painfully quiet. As if she knew that the truth she was sharing would land like thunder, but had to be whispered instead. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media platforms buckled under the traffic. Hashtags supporting Catherine surged across continents. News anchors choked up while reading her statement live on air. Candlelight vigils ignited once again. Outside Kensington and Windsor, from school children to heads of state, messages of solidarity poured in. But amid the flood of emotion, one image haunted the nation most. William blindsided. Reports confirmed he hadn't been told exactly when Catherine would release the video. Hours after it aired, during a school engagement, a child asked him the question everyone had been asking. "How is Catherine?" And in front of a classroom full of students, William broke. His face fell. He turned his head away. And for the first time in his public life, he cried openly, visibly, without restraint. The press, unusually respectful, chose not to broadcast the footage. Even they understood that what had just happened transcended the royal spectacle. Catherine had done something no royal had ever done. She shattered the image of perfection with truth. She gave up the carefully constructed armor of the crown and stood instead as a mother, a wife, a woman faces solace stood drowsy, just listen to Sarah's face. Dies ist den Bestimmt. The greatest battle. And in doing so, she didn't weaken the monarchy, she changed it forever. Her vulnerability wasn't a flaw. It became the very strength the institution had long pretended to have. The monarchy's carefully maintained mystique, centuries in the making, was pierced in just over a minute. And yet, the damage wasn't destructive. It was liberating, themselves in a royal figure. Not through titles or tiaras, but through pain, courage, and clarity. But while the world praised her bravery, inside palace walls, a new war was raging, one that questioned who would fill the void if Catherine never returned. As the nation grieved, others schemed. The palace was no longer just a place of mourning. It became a battlefield for influence. And not everyone had Catherine's interests at heart. While the public lit candles and prayed, while messages of love and solidarity flooded royal channels, behind those ancient walls, something far more cynical was unfolding. The vacuum created by Catherine's absence had stirred a dangerous energy. No one dared say the word replacement. Not allowed. But the implications were clear in the whispered conversations. The rescheduled engagements. The shuffling of roles once sacred and untouched. The reality was dawning on many within the institution. What if she never returned? And in that space of uncertainty, power began to shift. Members of Camilla's inner circle, those long accustomed to operating behind the curtain, saw a unique opening. Whispers emerged about expanding her public profile once more. Talk of resuming high-profile duties, reclaiming ceremonial appearances, stepping in where needed. The language was careful. The motives were not. It was never framed as ambition. It was presented as necessity, as duty. But those closest to Catherine knew exactly what was happening. Princess Anne wasn't fooled. Neither was Sophie. These were women forged in the crucible of royal duty, loyal not to strategy, but to truth. They shut down the conversations wherever they found them. In one private meeting, Anne reportedly confronted a senior aide directly, warning that even floating the idea of a stand-in would fracture what was left of public trust. Sophie followed suit, aligning herself with the belief that Catherine's absence was not a void to be filled, but a weight to be respected. The crown could endure short silence, but it could not survive betrayal masked as protocol. Still, the quiet maneuvering continued. Calendars were reviewed, patronage responsibilities began shifting. Certain appearances were reassigned under the justification of continuity. All of it done behind William's back, until he found out. When he did, fury followed. William made it clear there would be no substitutes, no proxies, no soft launches of anyone attempting to take her place. "She's not gone," he said sharply during a tense strategy session. "And she's not to be erased." It wasn't just a line. It was a wall, a boundary drawn in defense of the woman whose very identity the monarchy was built upon in this new age. But William's words weren't enough to halt the undercurrent of distrust now coursing through the palace. The once unified institution was unraveling. Sides were forming. Some clung to tradition, others to optics, and a few more, quietly, to Catherine's humanity. The balance of power, so often managed with precision, now swayed unpredictably with every closed-door discussion. And in that instability, trust was the first casualty. Loyalty began to erode. Advisors grew wary of each other. Meetings became battlegrounds of subtext and subtle sabotage. Even those who meant well found themselves questioning who to follow, who to believe, all while the public, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing within, continued to mourn and pray, never imagining that behind the palace's grand facade, a political war had begun. And just when it felt like hope was slipping away, Catherine speaks again, delivering news that no one dared to expect. The world had prepared to say goodbye. But then, in a moment as unexpected as it was miraculous, Catherine returned not as the princess they remembered, but as the woman they would never forget. The cancer was in remission. The hope was back, but the fear never fully left. It came, quietly, just as her previous message had. Another video, another short, unadorned address. But this time, there was a shift. Her face, still thinner than before, carried a calm resilience. She thanked the public once again, not out of obligation, but with visible sincerity. She acknowledged the outpouring of love, the messages, the vigils. And then came the words that stunned the world. Her treatment had worked. The cancer was no longer active. She was, for now, in remission. But this wasn't a celebration. There were no triumphant phrases or promises of swift return. Her voice was measured. Her smile, though warm, carried the weight of someone who knew too well how fragile this new peace truly was. She didn't speak like someone who had won. She spoke like someone who had survived, and who understood the road ahead was still uncertain. Medical experts across networks quickly clarified what her message carefully implied. Remission is not a cure. It is hope, yes, but it is also vigilance. It means the worst has passed for now, but it does not guarantee the storm is over. And within the palace, that caution shaped every next move. William, while relieved, remained fiercely protective. He insisted Catherine would not return to public duties in full. Not yet, perhaps not for a long while. Her appearances would be limited, private, and entirely on her terms. He wouldn't let the machinery of the crown consume her again. She had given enough. Now, she needed to heal on her own schedule. True to his word, Catherine re-entered public life not with fanfare, but in the smallest, most intimate ways. She visited a hospital ward quietly, attended a meeting with her early childhood team behind closed doors. No photographers, no statements, just presence. Fragile, but present. And then came the moment that truly broke the silence. At a small school function, Catherine was seen walking hand in hand with her children. It wasn't an official event. There were no media outlets invited, but a single image captured by a fellow parent and shared with quiet respect spread like wildfire, not because of what it showed, but because of what it meant. Catherine was back, not fully, not loudly, but she was there, holding her children, living, breathing, healing. That one moment spoke louder than any press release could. It was not the return of a royal figure. It was the reappearance of a mother who had walked through the storm and still stood tall enough to guide her children forward. People wept, not because they pitied her, but because they saw in her something real, something human. Still, the whispers never stopped, not within palace walls. Behind every closed-door meeting, one question remained unspoken but ever-present. What if it returns? What if this moment of light is temporary? And how does the monarchy prepare for a future it now knows can collapse in a heartbeat? But even as the world exhaled, the palace knew this journey had rewritten everything, from protocol to legacy, and Catherine's impact was only beginning. Catherine didn't just survive, she transformed the very heart of the monarchy. What began as a tragedy became a reckoning. Behind palace doors, policies changed. Outside them, people saw royalty not as symbols, but as souls. Her pain became power, and a story is far from over. For generations, the monarchy had relied on illusion. The image of strength, the facade of perfection. Vulnerability was hidden, edited, or erased. But Catherine's ordeal exposed a truth that could no longer be denied. Illness does not discriminate. Titles don't shield hearts from breaking. And silence, once used to protect, had nearly destroyed what the crown claimed to uphold. In the months following her remission, palace advisors, many of whom once resisted transparency, found themselves rewriting the rules. New contingency protocols were drafted, not just for sovereign transitions, but for long-term health-related absences. Communications teams were retrained. Internal briefings began to emphasize emotional honesty over public relations tactics. Catherine had forced the palace to confront its own fear of fragility. And from that confrontation, something rare was born. Growth. But the transformation wasn't limited to process. It was emotional. Global support for Catherine didn't stem from it, came from connection. She had shown the world what no royal had dared before. Pain, uncertainty, and the quiet courage to speak in the middle of both. That authenticity redefined how the public saw their princess. She was no longer just a figure in polished portraits. She was real. And in that reality, she became something far greater than a ceremonial figure. She became a reflection of every person who has ever been afraid. Every family who has ever waited by a hospital bed. Every parent who's faced the unimaginable and still chosen to keep going. Her charitable work, long known for its focus on early childhood development and mental health, now carried deeper urgency. Her handwritten notes to families facing similar medical battles. Οι απροειδοποίητες επισκέψεις της σε νοσοκομεία, η σιωπηλή υποστήριξη της μεταρρύθμισης και ο τρόπος με τον οποίο η βασιλική οικογένεια συνδέεται με το κοινό. Όλα αυτά άρχισαν να διαμορφώνουν μια νέα αφήγηση. Μια ιστορία που συνδύαζε το βασιλικό καθήκον με τη ριζοσπαστική ενσυναίσθηση. Όχι την απόδοση, αλλά τον σκοπό. Ωστόσο, πίσω από τη δημόσια δύναμη, οι ιδιωτικές στιγμές παρέμεναν χαραγμένες σε μια ήσυχη θλίψη. Κατά τη διάρκεια των πιο αβέβαιων εβδομάδων της, η Κάθριν φέρεται να είχε γράψει προσωπικές επιστολές στον Τζόρτζ, τη Σάρλοτ και τον Λούις. Κείμενα που δεν σκόπευε ποτέ να δει ο κόσμος. Επιστολές σφραγισμένες. Αποθηκευμένες μόνο και μόνο για να ανοιχτούν αν δεν επέστρεφε. Η τελευταία προστασία μιας μητέρας. Αν και δεν επιβεβαιώθηκε ποτέ επίσημα, η ύπαρξη αυτών των επιστολών πρόσθεσε ένα επίπεδο συναισθήματος που λίγοι μπορούσαν να αγνοήσουν. Δεν επρόκειτο για μια αφηρημένη ασθένεια. Αυτός ήταν ένας εφιάλτης που βιώθηκε. Υπέμεινε με χάρη, αλλά ποτέ χωρίς κόστος. Τώρα, η Κατερίνη δεν θεωρείται απλώς μια μελλοντική βασίλισσα σύζυγος. Είναι το συναισθηματικό κέντρο της μοναρχίας. Όχι λόγω του στέμματός της, αλλά λόγω της ανθρώπινης φύσης της. Ο ίδιος ο θεσμός που κάποτε έθαβε το συναίσθημα τώρα διαμορφώνεται από το δικό της. Η φωνή της, που κάποτε αναμενόταν να αντυχεί την παράδοση, έχει γίνει μια δύναμη αλλαγής. Μια υπενθύμηση ότι η σιωπή μπορεί να είναι ισχυρή, αλλά η αλήθεια, ακόμα και όταν είναι επώδυνη, είναι ισχυρότερη. Η μοναρχία έχει αναδυθεί αλλοιωμένη και, ενώ η δομή παραμένει, η ψυχή της έχει μετατοπιστεί. Μια γυναίκα που στεκόταν στα πρόθυρα του θανάτου είχε επιστρέψει. Όχι μόνο με ζωή, αλλά και με σκοπό. Και το παλάτι, που τώρα αναγκάζεται να συμφιλιωθεί με το παρελθόν του, έχει αρχίσει να προχωρά μπροστά, όχι μόνο με το κεφάλι ψηλά, αλλά και με την καρδιά του ανοιχτή. Το ταξίδι της δεν έχει τελειώσει ακόμα. Αλλά ένα πράγμα είναι σαφές: η Κάθριν δεν επέστρεψε έτσι απλά. Ξαναχτίστηκε. Και με αυτόν τον τρόπο, ίσως έσωσε την ψυχή της μοναρχίας. Ευχαριστώ που παρακολουθήσατε. Μην ξεχάσετε να κάνετε like και subscribe. Και θα σας δούμε στο επόμενο.